Monuments are often born from a desperate need to impress a rival. The greatest architectural wonders in human history were not built in isolation, but in fierce competition. This video will reveal how the rivalries between early states directly ignited golden ages of building, innovation, and art. You will learn to see ancient ruins not as peaceful temples, but as the weapons of a silent war for prestige. Why would a king bankrupt his kingdom to build a slightly taller pyramid? How did a city's god grow more powerful simply because its temple was more dazzling than the neighbors? We will journey from the deserts of Egypt to the jungles of Mesoamerica, uncovering the stories written in stone by ambition and envy. What does it say about us that our most lasting achievements so often come from the urge to outdo someone else? Think of two kings, their thrones separated by a river or a stretch of desert. Each morning, their first report is not of troop movements, but of construction. A new quarry has been opened upstream. A foreign architect has been hired with promises of gold. The sound of chisels echoes across the border, a constant reminder that the competition is not sleeping. This was the reality of an architectural arms race, a silent stone and mortar contest where the goal was not to destroy your rival, but to utterly overshadow them. Historian Simon Schommer called landscape the theater of power, and in these early states, every new temple, every taller pyramid, was a dramatic act performed on that stage. It was a way to compete without declaring. A massive building project shouted a message in a language everyone could understand. It said, "Look at my wealth, look at my ability to command thousands of workers, look at the favor my gods clearly show me." This was power made visible, an ideology carved in granite. The metrics of this competition were brutally clear. Scale was the first and most obvious. A bigger structure required more resources and more labor, a direct flex of economic and organizational muscle. Then came material rarity. Importing dazzling white limestone from distant quarries or rare cedar wood from across the sea was not just about beauty, it was a display of far-reaching trade networks and lavish spending power. Finally, there was technological innovation, the ability to move a 200-ton stone block, to perfect a new style of arch, or to align a monument perfectly with the stars. These were demonstrations of a kingdom's intellectual capital. It proved they had the brightest minds, the most skilled engineers. For the citizens living within these rival states, these projects were a source of collective pride and identity. Your city's temple wasn't just a place of worship, it was proof you were part of the stronger, more blessed community. What does it say about us that we so often choose to compete with beauty and wonder, to build our legacies upward toward the sky? To find the answer, we must witness one of history's most intense and personal rivalries, a conflict that would give the world its most iconic skyline. The banks of the Nile hold the blueprint for this entire phenomenon. For centuries, the river was not a symbol of unity, but a dividing line between two powerful rivals, the kingdom of Upper Egypt with its white crown, and the kingdom of Lower Egypt with its red crown. Their competition was a constant simmer of border skirmishes and trade disputes, a struggle for control of the fertile land and the river itself. Then, around 3100 BC, a king named Narmer, likely from Upper Egypt, achieved the impossible. He defeated his northern rival and unified the two lands under a single rule, wearing a new double crown that combined the white and the red. But the architectural rivalry did not end with this political victory. It was, in fact, just getting started. Unification created a new problem for the pharaohs. How do you prove your legitimacy to millions of people who, until yesterday, saw you as the enemy? You cannot rule by force alone across such a vast territory. The answer was written in stone. The early dynastic pharaohs transformed their new capital, Memphis, and the vast burial grounds at Saqqara into a permanent press release of their power. The most stunning example is the Step Pyramid of Djoser, built nearly 5,000 years ago. Egyptologist Toby Wilkinson notes this was far more than a royal tomb. It was the first monumental structure in the world built entirely of cut stone, a six-tiered mountain reaching for the heavens. Its message was unambiguous. Only a state of immense wealth, unparalleled organization, and divine mandate could possibly orchestrate such a feat. It told every citizen, from the former Red Crown lands to the White, that they were now part of something colossal and eternal. This set a dangerous precedent for every pharaoh who followed. Now, a ruler's legacy was measured directly against the stone achievements of his ancestors. The internal dynastic race was on. Each successor felt compelled to build bigger, grander, more perfect. This competitive drive fueled a century of frantic innovation. Architects moved from the stepped sides of Djoser's pyramid to the smooth, gleaming slopes of the pyramids at Giza. They perfected quarrying techniques to extract millions of limestone blocks. They developed complex logistics to feed and house an army of skilled laborers, not slaves but state-employed workers. They achieved astronomical precision, aligning the pyramid's sides almost perfectly with the cardinal points of the compass. This culminated in the Great Pyramid of Khufu, a project of such staggering scale it remained the tallest structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. It was the ultimate trophy in a silent contest between father and son, between one dynasty and the next, all vying to create the definitive monument to their reign. The Nile's lesson was clear: state-sponsored architecture could forge a national identity and immortalize a king's name, but only if it surpassed everything that came before. This template for competitive grandeur would soon be adopted in another fertile river valley, where the stakes were even higher and the gods themselves were watching from ziggurats that touched the clouds. Across the Nile, another civilization was learning the same lesson, but with a crucial twist. In the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, there were no single pharaohs to command a unified state. Instead, the plains of Mesopotamia were dotted with fiercely independent city-states, each a sovereign kingdom with its own ruler, its own army, and most importantly, its own patron deity. Here, the architectural arms race was not dynastic, it was urban, a relentless competition between neighbors like Uruk, and Lagash. Their weapon of choice was the ziggurat, a colossal stepped pyramid that served as a divine mountain, a bridge between earth and heaven. In this world, a city's power was not just political, it was theological. The stature of your city's god was directly proportional to the height and splendor of its home. A magnificent ziggurat was a billboard advertising divine favor. It proclaimed, "Our God is stronger, therefore our harvests are more bountiful, our armies are more victorious, our king is more legitimate." This sentiment echoes in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the hero boasts of Uruk's mighty walls built from fired brick, a testament to the city's advanced skill and enduring pride. The ziggurat was far more than a religious symbol, it was the beating economic heart of the city-state. These complexes drew pilgrims from across the region, individuals seeking blessings, oracles, or participation in great festivals. Where pilgrims traveled, trade followed. Markets sprung up at the base of the ziggurat, dealing in grain, textiles, and precious lapis lazuli. This influx of people and wealth created a self-reinforcing cycle. Prosperity allowed for a more lavish temple, which attracted more pilgrims, which generated more prosperity. To outbuild your rival, you needed to master materials in a resource-scarce environment. Sumerian architects performed miracles with mud. They developed the world's first true arches and vaults using molded mud brick. They invented glazed bricks in vibrant blues and golds, creating dazzling facades that shimmered in the desert sun. They crafted intricate mosaics with thousands of colored clay cones pressed into walls depicting sacred patterns. The ziggurat of Ur, as rebuilt by King Ur-Nammu around 2100 BC, stands as the ultimate example of this competitive statement. Ur had suffered a period of decline, overshadowed by its neighbors. Ur-Nammu's massive reconstruction project, using a core of sun-dried mud brick sheathed in a protective skin of fired brick, was a declaration of revival. It shouted to rival kings that Ur was back, its god Nana was once again preeminent, and its king commanded the labor and loyalty to raise a mountain to the sky. Every brick laid was a challenge issued. This constant one-upmanship in sacred architecture did more than create stunning skylines. It forced rapid advances in engineering, administration, and art. It centralized power, as only a strong ruler could coordinate such projects. Ultimately, this fierce but localized competition laid the essential groundwork for something entirely new. The drive to surpass your neighbor eventually leads to the desire to simply eliminate them, to bring all those competing city-states under a single, overwhelming authority. The stage was now set for a rivalry of a different scale, where architecture would become the tool not of city-states, but of empires clashing over the very idea of civilization. But the ziggurat's shadow could only stretch so far. For all their brilliance, the Sumerian city-states were trapped in a cycle of local rivalry, a game with familiar players and predictable moves. The rules changed forever when an outsider looked upon their gleaming temples and saw not objects of worship, but trophies to be claimed. His name was Sargon, and he emerged not from a venerable Sumerian dynasty, but from the northern region of Akkad. Around 2334 BC, he achieved what no Sumerian king ever had. He united the perpetually squabbling cities through sheer military force, forging history's first true empire. This conquest created a new and profound architectural rivalry, no longer city against city, but empire against the very culture it had swallowed. Sargon faced a dilemma. He could destroy the magnificent ziggurats and palaces of the Sumerians, but that would erase the source of the land's wealth and legitimacy. Instead, he chose a more cunning path: assimilation. His new imperial capital, Akkad, was designed not to ignore Sumerian tradition, but to absorb and then overwhelm it. Historians note that Akkadian architecture became a deliberate synthesis. They adopted the ziggurat form but built their own on a newly imperial scale. They used the mud brick and glazed tile techniques of the south, but infused them with distinct Akkadian artistic styles, celebrating the emperor and his military victories. This was architecture as political propaganda. The most telling innovation was the victory stele, a tall, carved stone pillar. For the Sumerians, art often depicted gods and religious ceremonies. For Sargon and his successors, like his grandson Naram-Sin, the stele became a narrative billboard. The famous stele of Naram-Sin does not show a quiet religious scene. It shows the emperor, larger than life, climbing a mountain under the symbols of the gods, while his defeated enemies lie scattered below. This was a new kind of monument, one that told a story of conquest and divine favor in a single, overpowering image. These stelae were erected in conquered cities, not as acts of destruction, but as permanent, imposing revisions of history. They said, "Your old gods may still be honored, but your new reality is us." This imperial approach created a tension that would echo for millennia, the rivalry between regional identity and imperial homogenization. The Akkadian administration standardized certain forms and motifs across its vast territory, from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, creating a visual language of power that any subject would recognize. Yet, in local temples and smaller projects, the older Sumerian styles persisted, a quiet cultural resistance in brick and mortar. The Akkadians proved that the ultimate power move was not to erase your rival's legacy, but to claim it as your own foundation and then build something even more audacious on top of it. This template of imperial appropriation, of competing with the past you have conquered, would become a recurring script, and as we will see, a similar drama was unfolding at the very same time, far to the west, where another nascent power was looking across the water, measuring itself against a civilization of breathtaking sophistication. Yet the drama of empire was not confined to the great river valleys. While Sargon's successors ruled in Mesopotamia, a very different competition was taking shape across the wine-dark sea. On the island of Crete, a civilization had risen that seemed to defy all the rules. The Minoans, named for the legendary King Minos, built not fortresses but sprawling, colorful palaces like the one at Knossos. Their architecture was a celebration of openness, with central courtyards, intricate multi-story layouts that gave rise to the myth of the labyrinth, and sophisticated light wells that bathed frescoed walls in sun. These were not monuments to a warrior king, but the nerve centers of a maritime trading empire, buzzing with artisans, administrators, and elaborate ritual. The walls were adorned with scenes of dolphins and bull leaping, not conquest. Their power flowed from the sea, from commerce and a complex, seemingly peaceful religion. Look north to the rugged mainland of Greece, and you find their ultimate rival, the Mycenaeans. Here, architecture tells a starkly different story. Their greatest achievement is not a palace, but a citadel. Mycenae crouches on a hilltop, protected by walls so massive later Greeks believed only the mythical Cyclopes could have built them. These are the famous Cyclopean walls, constructed of gigantic, rough-hewn stones. Where Knossos has light wells, Mycenae has a narrow, defensible entrance crowned by the Lion Gate, a slab of stone carved with two lions flanking a column, a symbol of roar guarding power. The central feature of a Mycenaean palace is the Megaron, a large rectangular hall centered on a massive hearth, a place for the warrior king to feast with his retinue. Even their grandest tombs, the so-called treasury of Atreus, are beehive-shaped structures buried in hillsides, monumental vaults for the dead, reached by long, intimidating entrance passages. For decades, archaeologists have debated the true nature of their relationship. Sir Arthur Evans, who excavated Knossos, saw a Minoan thalassocracy, a peaceful sea empire that culturally dominated the mainland. Carl Blegen, excavator of sites like Pylos, saw the Mycenaeans as powerful, independent successors. The truth likely lies in a tense dance of trade, imitation, and eventual conflict. Early Mycenaean art and architecture clearly show Minoan influence, a cultural envy for their sophistication. They adopted fresco painting, certain pottery styles, and even the concept of the central palace complex. But they reinterpreted everything through the lens of their own warrior society. The open courtyards became fortified enclosures. The vibrant marine frescoes were joined by scenes of hunting and warfare. This architectural evolution reflects a shift in power. A catastrophic event, the colossal eruption of the volcano on Thera around the 16th century BC, likely devastated Minoan coastal centers and their fleet. In the aftermath, Mycenaean influence surged. They began to build not just citadels but entire fortified coastal settlements, signaling a move to control the sea lanes themselves. This rivalry between palace and citadel represents a fundamental clash of ideologies made stone. One prioritized connection, ritual, and the accumulation of wealth through trade. The other prioritized defense, hierarchy, and the projection of military might. The Mycenaeans did not merely copy their rivals, they competed with them by creating an entirely different architectural language of power, one born from a world perceived as more dangerous. Their towering walls were a direct response to both external threats and the cultural shadow of their more graceful neighbor. When the Bronze Age world eventually collapsed in a cascade of migration, climate shift, and conflict, these fortified citadels too were abandoned. But the template they created, the idea of a city defined by its walls and its warrior heart, would lie dormant in the Greek soil, waiting to be rediscovered and reborn in a new age of city-states, where competition would become an art form in itself. The silence that followed the Mycenaean collapse was not an ending but an intermission. When the curtain rose again, the stage was no longer held by kings or emperors but by citizens. The fragmented landscape of ancient Greece gave birth to the polis, the fiercely independent city-state, and with it, a rivalry more public and ideological than any that had come before. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Syracuse, these were not just political entities, they were competing ideas about how life should be lived. And in this contest, architecture became the ultimate tool of persuasion, a permanent argument in marble about whose way was best. The very columns that held up their temples were declarations of identity. The sturdy, masculine Doric order spoke of Spartan discipline and mainland tradition. The more graceful, scroll-topped Ionic columns evoked the sophistication and maritime reach of cities like Athens. These were not mere aesthetic choices, they were regional badges in stone, instantly recognizable statements of who you were and where you stood in the Greek world. No one understood this power of stone better than the Athenian statesman Pericles. In the 5th century BC, following victories against the Persian Empire, he proclaimed an astonishing ambition to make Athens the school of Hellas. His classroom would be the Acropolis, the sacred rock overlooking the city, funded controversially by the treasury of the Delian League, an alliance originally formed for mutual defense. The building program was a masterstroke of soft power. It was a direct, dazzling assertion of Athenian dominance over its allies and its great rival, Sparta. The message was clear: our wealth, our artistry, our vision for civilization, these are what true leadership looks like. The Parthenon, the centerpiece of this project, was a weapon of beauty. Its architects employed subtle optical refinements, curving the floor and leaning columns inward to create a sense of perfect, dynamic harmony to the human eye. Its sculptural program was a narrative of Athenian triumph and divine favor. The metopes depicted mythical battles between order and chaos, echoing Athens' real-world struggles. The magnificent frieze, once wrapping the building's inner chamber, showed a grand procession during the Panathenaic festival, a celebration of Athenian civic identity. And the pediments housed statues of Athena's birth and her contest with Poseidon, rooting the city's power in the deepest myths. Every element was calibrated to inspire awe and loyalty, to make both citizen and foreigner believe in Athenian exceptionalism. Contrast this with Sparta. Its rival invested not in temples but in training grounds. Spartan architecture was famously austere, functional, and focused on the military machine. Where Athens built a monumental gateway, the Propylaea, Sparta produced unmatched hoplites. This was the rivalry in its purest form, the glorification of the individual mind and spirit versus the supremacy of the collective, disciplined body. The competition even extended to neutral ground. At Panhellenic sanctuaries like Olympia and Delphi, supposed centers of shared Greek identity, city-states built lavish little treasuries. These were essentially showrooms, stone cabinets where a polis could display its finest spoils and artworks, directly comparing its wealth and taste to its neighbors right next door. This relentless one-upmanship did more than produce pretty buildings. It fueled an engine of innovation. The need to build taller, more elegant, more impressive structures pushed Greek engineers and artists to new heights. They refined bronze casting, perfected marble carving to achieve flowing, realistic drapery, and developed complex systems of proportion that would influence design for millennia. The Greek architectural arms race was a public debate that yielded timeless masterpieces. But this world of competing city-states was about to meet a force for which it was utterly unprepared. A single, colossal empire from the east that viewed their beautiful rivalries as a weakness to be exploited. Yet the polished marble of the Parthenon could not withstand the ambition of one man. Alexander the Great swept across the known world, from Greece to the borders of India, forging an empire vaster than any before. But when he passed away at just 32, that empire did not pass to a single heir. It shattered into pieces, each claimed by one of his former generals. The result was not peace, but a new and spectacular form of competition. The Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Syria and Persia, and the Antigonids in Macedonia were now locked in a relentless struggle to prove who was the true successor to Alexander's legacy. Their battlefield was not just military, it was urban. They fought with city foundations and monuments in a contest of gigantism and sheer theatrical scale. Historian Peter Green describes Hellenistic kingship as profoundly theatrical. A performance where the king was the lead actor and architecture provided the overwhelming stage set. To build a magnificent new city was to write your name permanently into the story of civilization. Ptolemy I understood this perfectly. In Egypt, he did not choose the ancient capital of Memphis, but a strip of land between the Mediterranean and a lake. Here he founded Alexandria, a brand new port city built on a strict Hippodamian grid, a rational chessboard of straight avenues. Its purpose was to outshine every other city in the world. It boasted the Museum, a research institute that attracted the greatest scholars with salaries and tax exemptions, and its crown jewel, the legendary library, intended to hold a copy of every book in the world. This was not merely a collection of scrolls, it was the ultimate trophy, a concentration of all human knowledge meant to prove that Alexandria, and by extension the Ptolemies, were the new cultural center of the universe. Then there was the lighthouse, the Pharos, soaring over 100 meters tall. Its great mirror could reflect sunlight for miles by day, while a furnace lit the night, a breathtaking feat of engineering and a constant, blazing advertisement of Ptolemaic power and technological mastery to every ship approaching their shores. Not to be outdone, the Seleucids founded Antioch, a sprawling metropolis in Syria that became famous for its lavish public gardens, colonnaded streets, and a cutting-edge water supply system. Meanwhile, on a dramatic mountain terrace in Asia Minor, the Attalid kings of Pergamon created a city that was a single, breathtaking monument. Their entire Acropolis was engineered to awe. The great altar of Zeus, with its 300-foot-long frieze depicting gods battling giants in a metaphor for the Attalids' own victories, was not inside a temple. It was an open-air structure meant to be walked around and experienced. It placed the viewer directly within a mythic struggle, making them feel the power of the kings who commissioned it. These rulers used every tool available. They employed advanced engineering like Archimedes' screw pump for irrigation and mining. They practiced sophisticated urban planning to manage dense populations. But most of all, they understood that grand architecture was the ultimate tool for talent acquisition. A dazzling, well-funded city attracted the best poets, scientists, mercenaries, and merchants. This royal contest for prestige, this one-upmanship in stone and urban design, created a vibrant, interconnected Hellenistic world of unprecedented cultural exchange. But this glittering network of rival kingdoms was about to encounter a force that viewed their theatricality with cold, practical disdain. A republic from the West whose architectural language spoke not of gods and giants, but of roads, aqueducts, and absolute, orderly control. Rome's answer to the Carthaginian fleet was not a better navy, at least not at first. It was a road. While Carthage commanded the waves with its ingenious circular war harbors and vast merchant ships, Rome looked inward to the Italian peninsula itself and began to bind it together with stone and purpose. The rivalry between these two titans, spanning over a century in the Punic Wars, was the first total war in the Western world, and it was won not just by legions, but by an unparalleled mastery of infrastructure. This was a clash between two very different architectural philosophies. Carthage, the wealthy Phoenician colony, built for commerce and naval dominance. Its legendary double harbor featured an inner protected merchant port and a secretive ring-shaped military basin, allowing warships to be prepared and launched unseen. Their architecture was about controlling the flow of goods and projecting power across the Mediterranean. Rome, initially a land-based power, built for endurance and logistics. They saw that to defeat a maritime empire, they needed to move armies and supplies faster and more reliably than anyone thought possible. The Greek historian Polybius, who witnessed Rome's rise, noted their unique ability to learn from their enemies and then improve upon what they had learned. After early naval disasters, Rome did not just copy Carthaginian ship designs. They added a revolutionary boarding ramp, the corvus, turning a sea battle into a land battle on floating platforms. This adaptive, engineering-driven mindset defined their entire approach. The Via Appia, begun in 312 BC during the height of the conflict, was the ultimate expression of this. It was not a meandering path, but a militarily straight, gravel-paved highway that ran from Rome to the strategic south. It allowed legions to march in all weathers and supplies to follow them with relentless efficiency. Simultaneously, Rome planted fortified colonies at key crossroads, self-sufficient towns of citizen soldiers that acted as permanent garrisons and anchors of Roman culture. When they laid siege to Carthaginian strongholds, they did not simply surround them. They built colossal, double-walled siege works, complete with their own internal supply lines, demonstrating an almost inhuman capacity for organized labor. This infrastructural dominance created a devastating strategic asymmetry. Carthage could win battles, but Rome could sustain a war effort for decades, recovering from losses that would have crippled another state. The final, terrible act of this rivalry was architectural in its utter finality. In 146 BC, after a brutal siege, Rome did not just defeat Carthage, they systematically erased it. The city was razed, its famous walls and harbors dismantled stone by stone, and tradition says the fields were sown with salt, a symbolic curse to prevent rebirth. This was the ultimate negation through architecture, an attempt to unbuild a rival. Yet, in a final twist of competitive absorption, Rome later rebuilt Carthage as a Roman city, adopting and refining the very harbor engineering they had once sought to destroy. The Punic Wars forged a core Roman belief that infrastructure was not a civic luxury, it was the skeleton of empire. Having proven their engineering might against the ultimate external foe, Rome's most consuming rivalry was about to turn inward, a contest that would reshape the heart of the city itself and redefine spectacle forever. The Roman Forum was a crowded gallery of stone ambition. Every emperor who ascended to power saw this sacred civic space not as a finished masterpiece, but as a blank canvas awaiting his personal signature. This was the ultimate internal rivalry, a competition not with a foreign enemy, but with the ghosts of past rulers. To build was to secure your legacy and placate a restless populace. The biographer Suetonius captured this drive perfectly, quoting Augustus' famous boast that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. This was more than renovation. It was a declaration of a new, imperial aesthetic meant to erase the memory of the chaotic republic and stamp the city with one man's vision. Each subsequent emperor felt the pressure to contribute something bigger, more ingenious, or more generous. They competed in distinct architectural genres, turning public necessity into personal propaganda. The public baths, like the colossal complex of Caracalla, were not merely for hygiene. They were sprawling leisure cities offering libraries, gardens, and gymnasiums free to the citizenry. By providing such opulent comfort, an emperor bought loyalty and demonstrated his boundless capacity to provide for Rome's people. The amphitheater became another arena for imperial one-upmanship. The Flavian Amphitheater, known as the Colosseum, was built by the emperors Vespasian and Titus on the site of Nero's unpopular private lake. Its construction was a brilliant political act, returning land to the public and creating a venue for spectacle that dwarfed all previous wooden structures. Its sheer scale, seating over 50,000, and its complex hypogeum of tunnels and elevators below the sand, were technological marvels meant to showcase Flavian ingenuity and generosity. Then there were the narrative monuments. Trajan's column, rising over 100 feet tall, is a stone scroll winding upwards, depicting in exquisite detail his military campaigns in Dacia. It was the centerpiece of his entire forum complex, which included a vast market and library. This was legacy building in 3 dimensions, a permanent, accessible record of imperial achievement placed at the very heart of the city. This feverish competition was powered by a revolutionary material, Roman concrete. Unlike the stone blocks of the Greeks, this pozzolana-based concrete could be poured into wooden frames to create vast, soaring interior spaces. It allowed for the monumental vaulted ceilings of the baths, the tiered substructures of the amphitheater, and the majestic dome of the Pantheon. Concrete gave architects the freedom to think in terms of interior volume and dramatic light, enabling ever more impressive public works that aimed to stun the senses. The rivalry even extended to the provinces, where emperors vied to fund iconic structures, from aqueducts in distant Gaul to temples in Asia Minor, binding the empire together with a network of monumental gratitude. This relentless drive to outbuild one's predecessors pushed Roman engineering to its absolute zenith, creating a city that was a living museum of competitive power. But as the empire later split into eastern and western halves, the nature of this competition underwent a profound transformation. The quest for legacy began to shift from the earthly city to the heavenly one, from the forum to the church, setting the stage for a rivalry that would define the next millennium. The marble of the forum now faced a rival it could not outspend: faith. As the Roman Empire officially embraced Christianity in the 4th century, the nature of architectural competition underwent a profound transformation. The goal was no longer to glorify an emperor, but to validate a new state religion and win the allegiance of every soul in the empire. This spiritual contest unfolded on 2 fronts, against the lingering grandeur of pagan traditions and against competing interpretations of Christianity itself. The construction of the first great basilicas, like Old St. Peter's in Rome, funded by Emperor Constantine, was a strategic masterstroke. These were not hidden cathedrals, but public, imposing structures built on the edges of cities, often directly over sacred pagan sites or burial grounds of revered martyrs. This was architecture as both conquest and conversion, physically superimposing the new faith upon the old. The basilica's design, borrowed from Roman civic halls, was perfectly suited for this new battle. Its long, processional nave could hold thousands, creating a powerful sense of communal identity that dwarfed the intimate, secretive gatherings of mystery cults. The focus was drawn to the distant apse where the altar sat, emphasizing the authority of the clergy and the singular path to salvation they offered. This was a direct response to a pressing need for order. The early church was fractured by theological debates, with rival sects like the Arians building their own impressive places of worship. To combat this, the Council of Nicaea in 325 did more than settle doctrine. It implicitly encouraged a standardized approach to sacred space. A uniform design became a tool against heresy, a way to make Orthodox Christianity instantly recognizable and authoritative across the empire. Historian Peter Brown speaks of the rise of the holy in this period, a fierce competition for spiritual prestige centered on relics, the physical remains of saints and martyrs. These objects were believed to hold immense power, and they required magnificent architectural containers. A church needed to be grand enough to honor the saint within and to accommodate the floods of pilgrims they attracted. This drove a race for splendor. architects employed towering clerestory windows, flooding the nave with a divine light that no dark pagan temple could match. The walls and apses glittered with gold leaf mosaics depicting Christ in majesty, visual sermons in glass and stone that overwhelmed the senses with heavenly glory. Every element was calculated to demonstrate that the Christian God and the imperial church that represented him possessed a majesty and a bounty that made all older gods seem feeble by comparison. It was a battle for hearts and minds fought not with legions but with light, space, and spectacle. This foundational rivalry within a unifying faith, however, contained the seeds of a much greater schism. As the political unity of Rome fractured, so too did its religious architecture, setting the stage for a centuries-long dialogue and competition between two distinct visions of heaven on earth. The dome of Hagia Sophia was not merely a roof, it was a theological argument made manifest. When Emperor Justinian dedicated this new cathedral in Constantinople in the year 537, he sought to achieve something more than architectural beauty. He aimed to restore the spiritual and political authority of a fractured Roman Empire, now centered in the East. His chronicler, Procopius, wrote that the building's dome seemed not to rest upon solid masonry, but to be suspended from heaven by a golden chain. This was the core of Byzantine ambition, to create a space where heaven and empire met, where the emperor himself was God's chosen representative on earth. The technical mastery behind this vision was as revolutionary as its message. The central challenge was placing a vast, circular dome atop a massive square base. The solution was the pendentive, a curved triangular segment of masonry that acts as a transition between the two shapes. It was a stroke of engineering genius that allowed the weight of the dome to be channeled down through four great piers, creating an interior of breathtaking, uninterrupted space. The effect was one of mystical unity. The eye is drawn irresistibly upward into that golden, floating canopy, surrounded by a soft glow from 40 windows at the dome's base. Light here was not a storyteller, but a divine presence, a symbol of God's unapproachable and all-encompassing glory. This architectural form, the centralized plan crowned by a dome, became the definitive blueprint for Byzantine churches for 1,000 years. Its influence would later ripple outward, profoundly shaping the great mosques of the Islamic world, which admired and adapted its logic of sacred, centralized space. Hagia Sophia stood as the ultimate statement of imperial theology, a single, overwhelming volume of light meant to humble the individual before the majesty of God and Emperor. But in the West, a different vision of the sacred was rising, stone by pointed stone, from the soil of emerging nations. The Great Schism of the year 1054 formally split Eastern and Western Christendom, and architecture immediately began to express their diverging paths. If Hagia Sophia was about divine unity and imperial power, the Gothic cathedrals of Western Europe were about communal aspiration and narrative journey. Cities like Chartres, Reims, and Paris entered into fierce, friendly competitions to build the tallest, brightest, and most glorious church. Funded by wealthy guilds, local bishops, and ordinary citizens, these cathedrals were badges of urban pride, not imperial decree. Their technological marvel was the flying buttress, an external skeleton of stone ribs that leaped away from the walls. This innovation bore the weight of the vaults, allowing the walls themselves to become vast, fragile curtains of stained glass. The Latin cross or longitudinal plan emphasized a processional path from the west entrance to the distant altar, a metaphor for the pilgrim's journey through life. Here, light was not a uniform mystical haze, it was a colored narrative. Sunlight streaming through biblical scenes in the rose windows and lancets painted the interior in shifting hues of ruby, sapphire, and emerald, literally illuminating the stories of Scripture for a largely illiterate populace. This was a rivalry of architectural philosophy, central plan versus longitudinal plan, the light of divine presence versus the light of sacred story. One expressed the centralized authority of a heavenly emperor, the other reflected the striving, communal faith of burgeoning cities. While this centuries-long spiritual dialogue between East and West shaped the skylines of Christendom, a new force was gathering strength in a landscape both empires had long overlooked, the vast and demanding deserts of Arabia. Jerusalem's skyline was forever changed by a single, shimmering dome. In the year 691, the Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik completed the Dome of the Rock on the city's sacred plateau. Its location was no accident. It was built directly over the foundation stone, a site holy to Jews and Christians alike. This was not merely a mosque, it was a breathtaking declaration of a new world order. The Umayyads, having rapidly expanded the Islamic Caliphate from Spain to Persia, faced a profound challenge: how to visually assert their authority over a diverse, conquered population. Their answer was to compete with the very monuments of the empires they had superseded. For the Dome of the Rock, they hired the finest Byzantine mosaicists, who covered the interior with intricate, non-figurative patterns and inscriptions in gold. The dazzling exterior, sheathed in gold leaf and later vibrant tiles, created a radiant crown for the city, a statement meant to surpass the nearby Church of the Holy Sepulchre in splendor. In their capital of Damascus, they performed a similar act of architectural alchemy. The Great Mosque was constructed within the massive temenos, or sacred precinct, of a former Roman temple to Jupiter, which itself had been converted into a Christian cathedral. They repurposed the existing towering walls and corner towers, transforming them into the first true minarets, a call to prayer that echoed from a Roman base. This genius lay in assimilation. By employing Byzantine and Persian craftsmen, the Umayyads did not erase the past. They absorbed its most impressive techniques to forge a new, syncretic imperial style. This visual language proclaimed that Islam was the legitimate heir to both Rome and Persia, a faith and a power capable of unifying the classical world. Their remote desert palaces, like Mshata and Casa Amra, served as private retreats and hunting lodges, but their walls were adorned with stunning frescoes of courtly life and celestial imagery, blending Sasanian royal motifs with emerging Islamic artistic sensibilities. This was architecture as a tool of legitimacy, a way to speak to subject peoples in a visual dialect they already respected. But a rival dynasty was watching, and they believed the Umayyads had grown corrupt, too enamored with the Syrian past they had conquered. In 750, a brutal revolution toppled the Umayyads, bringing the Abbasid family to power. Their architectural response was not to adapt old cities, but to invent a new one from scratch. The Abbasid Caliph Al-Mansur founded Baghdad as the Round City, a perfect circle of concentric walls with his palace and the great mosque at the absolute center. Called the City of Peace, its geometric perfection was a metaphor for a new, more purely Islamic and Persian-influenced order, a deliberate rejection of the Umayyads' Roman and Byzantine associations. Later, the Caliph al-Mutawakkil sought an even more overwhelming statement. In the city of Samarra, he commissioned the Great Mosque, which for centuries remained the largest in the world. Its most iconic feature was the Malwiya, a colossal spiral minaret rising over 170 feet tall. Unlike the square Syrian towers of the Umayyads, this soaring helix created a unique, dynamic silhouette against the sky, a landmark visible for miles across the flat plain. It was a clear attempt to overshadow all that came before, a declaration that Abbasid ambition and piety operated on a previously unimaginable scale. This fierce dynastic rivalry, from the sacred rock in Jerusalem to the spiral tower in Samarra, acted as a powerful engine for cultural synthesis and innovation. It forced rapid development in structural engineering, decorative arts, and urban planning across an empire that spanned continents. but the story of this competition had one final dramatic act. A lone Umayyad prince had escaped the Abbasid purge, fleeing across the entire breadth of North Africa. He carried with him not just a claim to power, but the entire competitive architectural playbook of his dynasty, and he would use it to build a rival caliphate in a land of distant mountains and ancient stone. The lone Umayyad prince found his throne not in a palace but in an orchard. Abd al-Rahman I, the last survivor of his dynasty, crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and established himself in the Iberian Peninsula, a land the Arabs called Al-Andalus. His first symbolic act was to plant a palm tree, a living piece of home. His second was to purchase the Christian church of St. Vincent in the city of Cordoba, and on its site he began to build a monument to memory, resilience, and a defiant new cultural supremacy. The Great Mosque of Cordoba was his answer to the Abbasids who had destroyed his family. Its iconic forest of columns, topped by striking red and white double arches, was a direct, evocative quotation of the Great Mosque of Damascus, the lost Umayyad capital. But it was not a mere copy, it was an elaboration, a statement that the true Umayyad legacy had been transplanted and would now flourish even more brilliantly in the West. For nearly 2 centuries, successive rulers expanded this mosque, making it one of the largest and most magnificent sacred spaces in the Islamic world, a permanent declaration of Islamic sophistication in the very heart of medieval Europe. This created a profound and enduring architectural dialogue, a symphony in stone that played out over 7 centuries. To the north, the small Christian kingdoms that had survived in the mountains began their long campaign of reconquest, the Reconquista. But this was not solely a military endeavor, it was a cultural and architectural campaign to reclaim the landscape. As they captured territory, they built churches and castles in the heavy, fortress-like Romanesque style, and later in the soaring Gothic style imported from France. These structures were declarations of a renewed Christian identity and political power, yet the influence of Al-Andalus was inescapable. The Moors were not just rivals, they were neighbors and often collaborators. As Christian kings took control of cities with large Muslim populations, they frequently employed the very craftsmen who had built the mosques and palaces. This led to the birth of the Mudejar style, a stunning hybrid where Christian buildings were adorned with Islamic artistry, intricate geometric stucco work, elegant horseshoe arches, and beautiful ceramic tile known as azulejo. The Alcazar of Seville is a perfect testament to this layered rivalry. Originally a Moorish fort, it was radically rebuilt by the Christian king Pedro I in the 14th century. He hired the finest Muslim artisans from Granada to create its breathtaking courtyards and halls. The result is a palace where Gothic structure is clothed in Islamic decoration, a physical manifestation of a complex, intertwined history. Meanwhile, in the dwindling emirate of Granada, the Nasrid dynasty crafted their own masterpiece, the Alhambra. Built even as their political power waned, this hilltop palace complex was the apex of Andalusian architecture. It was not about overwhelming scale, but about exquisite refinement, a paradise on earth. Its courtyards, like the Court of the Lions, with its slender columns and delicate stucco walls carved like lace, celebrated water, light, and poetic inscription. It was as if the Nasrids, knowing their time was limited, chose to compete through beauty and subtlety rather than brute force. The final, most dramatic act of this centuries-long conversation was profoundly literal. Following the Christian conquest of Cordoba in the 13th century, the Great Mosque was consecrated as a cathedral. For centuries, it remained largely intact, a cathedral housed within an Islamic shell. But in the 16th century, the clergy decided a more definitive statement was needed. They obtained permission from King Charles V to construct a grand Gothic cathedral choir and transept directly in the center of the mosque's expansive prayer hall. When the king later saw the completed work, he is said to have remarked, You have built what you or anyone might have built anywhere, but you have destroyed something that was unique in the world. The inserted cathedral is a jarring, powerful symbol of conquest, yet it could not erase the surrounding forest of Umayyad arches. The building stands today as a palimpsest, a single structure where two worlds collide and coexist, a hybrid masterpiece born from relentless rivalry. This Iberian landscape proves that competition does not always lead to erasure. Sometimes it forces an astonishing, lasting fusion. While this symphony of stone and faith played out on the Iberian Peninsula, a different, more personal and explosive rivalry was about to redefine the skyline of Italy, pitting genius against genius in a race to crown a cathedral. A dome is a declaration of independence. In 15th century Florence, the massive octagonal base of the cathedral had stood open to the sky for decades, a gaping wound in the city's pride. The problem was simple and terrifying. No one knew how to build a dome wide and tall enough to cover it without the entire structure collapsing. The neighboring city of Siena had its own magnificent striped cathedral, a constant reminder of the stakes. This was not a contest between empires, but between merchant republics and the banking dynasties that ruled them. Wealth from wool, silk, and international finance poured into a new kind of warfare, fought with brushes, chisels, and geometric calculations. The Medici, the Strozzi, the Pazzi, these families competed for influence not through armies but through patronage, each seeking to prove themselves the most enlightened, the most magnificent, the true successors to ancient Rome. Their battlefield was the city itself. The painter and historian Giorgio Vasari, in his Lives of the Artists, captured the spirit perfectly, noting how artists were spurred on by glory and a noble rivalry. Into this arena stepped Filippo Brunelleschi, a goldsmith and clockmaker with a revolutionary mind. After losing a famous competition for the bronze doors of the city's baptistry, he turned his frustration toward the impossible dome. His solution was an act of sheer architectural genius, a double shell. The inner dome provided a majestic interior ceiling, while the outer, taller shell protected it from the weather and created the iconic silhouette Florence demanded. Between them, a hidden skeleton of stone and iron chains acted like a barrel's hoops containing the outward thrust. He invented new machines like an ox-driven hoist to lift millions of bricks into precise, self-supporting herringbone patterns. When the dome was finally completed in 1436, it was not just a roof, it was a trophy. It declared that Florentine intellect and daring had surpassed not only Siena and Pisa, but the very engineers of ancient Rome. This rivalry extended to the streets below. The stern, fortress-like Palazzo Vecchio, seat of the Republican government, faced a new challenge from the more refined, rusticated elegance of the Palazzo Medici, built by Cosimo de' Medici. The message was subtle but clear. Civic power could be matched, even overshadowed by private wealth and taste. Humanist learning became another arena for competition. Families raced to assemble the finest libraries of recovered classical texts, and the architect Leon Battista Alberti wrote his seminal treatise on the art of building, effectively creating a rulebook for this new classical style. Now, success could be measured and judged. Even the art commissioned for these buildings was part of the contest. A fresco in a church or a sculpture in a niche was not merely devotional. It was a public demonstration of the patron's discernment and the artist's skill, each masterpiece trying to outdo the last in realism, emotion, and intellectual depth. This unique ecosystem, where wealthy families and rival city-states pushed each other to new heights, created a concentrated explosion of creativity we call the Renaissance. It proved that peer competition among civic patrons could be as powerful a driver of golden ages as any imperial decree. Yet this world of human-scale marvels would seem almost intimate compared to the final act of our story, where rivalries unfolded in a landscape of gods and mountains, and the monuments were not meant to touch heaven, but to become the very bones of the earth. The jungle canopy parts to reveal a limestone mountain crafted by human hands. In the heart of the Maya world, the city of Tikal raised its temple of the two-headed serpent, Temple 4, to a height that still dominates the rainforest. It was built by a king named Yikin Chan Kayawil, and its purpose was as much political as it was spiritual, a direct challenge aimed at his city's great nemesis, the Kingdom of Calakmul. For over a century, these two superpowers, the so-called Snake Kingdom of Calakmul and the Mutal Dynasty of Tikal, waged a silent war of altitude and alignment, each seeking to prove their rulers' divine mandate through the grandeur of their pyramids. In Mesoamerica, architecture was cosmology made solid. A pyramid temple was a portal to the other world, a sacred mountain that connected the earthly realm with the celestial and the underworld. Its height was a measure of a king's ability to commune with the gods, and its precise orientation to the solstice sun or the planet Venus was a demonstration of esoteric knowledge and power. To build higher and with more precision than your rival was to prove your dynasty possessed a superior connection to the very forces that govern time, harvest, and fate. Mayanist David Stewart's work with hieroglyphs reveals how these structures were literal stone records of rivalry. The stairways and panels were inscribed with texts proclaiming military victories, the capture of enemy nobles, and the elaborate rituals performed by kings to sanctify their rule. A temple was not a quiet monument to faith. It was a booming, permanent press release carved in stone, declaring to allies and enemies alike who currently held the favor of the gods. This competition shaped entire cities. Urban planning was a sacred act with plazas, ball courts, and temple complexes arranged to mirror the Maya cosmos. The ballgame itself was far more than sport. It was a ritual drama often reenacting myths of creation and the struggle between light and dark. A city with a grander ball court, or one that hosted a more spectacular ritual game following a victory over a rival, strengthened its political and spiritual prestige. The rivalry also drove remarkable innovation under immense pressure. In a land without metal tools or the wheel, Maya engineers perfected a lime mortar so strong it has endured over 1,000 years of jungle humidity. They developed sophisticated corbel vaulting to create majestic interior spaces, and their sculptors covered buildings with intricate stucco facades depicting gods, kings, and cosmic monsters, each city trying to outdo the other in artistic splendor. The resource cost was staggering, consuming the labor of generations and requiring vast networks of trade and tribute, all to fuel this architectural arms race in the jungle. Centuries later and to the north, in the Valley of Mexico, a similar rivalry played out on an even more colossal scale. The Aztec metropolis of Tenochtitlan, founded on an island in Lake Texcoco, and the neighboring city-state of Texcoco were partners in the Triple Alliance, but also fierce cultural and political competitors. Their architectural statements reflected a different aesthetic and purpose. Where Maya pyramids were steep and towering, aiming for the sky, the Aztec Templo Mayor was a massive, broad platform with twin staircases leading to the shrines of two gods, Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc. This was a monument to imperial power and a different kind of cosmic balance between war and sustenance. The expansion of the Templo Mayor, undertaken by successive rulers, was a direct reflection of Aztec military success and their need to manage the cosmos through ritual. Each new layer, each grander renovation, was a bid to outshine not only Texcoco but all previous rulers, solidifying the reigning Tlatoani's legacy as the most powerful steward of the empire. The scale of these projects consumed the resources of a vast empire, driving advances in hydraulic engineering to manage the lake waters and in logistics to transport stone and materials from distant lands. From the rainforest to the lake valley, these New World rivalries reveal the same universal impulse we have traced across the globe. Whether to commune with gods, intimidate a neighbor, or immortalize a dynasty, human societies repeatedly turned to the silent, enduring language of architecture to compete. The stones of Tikal and Tenochtitlan whisper the same stories of ambition as those of Rome and Constantinople. But what are the actual mechanisms that transform this simple urge to outbuild into a true golden age? What common engines hidden beneath the stone drive these explosive periods of creativity? Rivalry is the ultimate pressure cooker for the human mind. When a king demands a taller pyramid or a city council insists on a brighter cathedral, they are not just commissioning a building, they are setting an impossible deadline for genius. The question was never if it could be done, but how quickly a solution could be found before the rival state unveiled its own wonder. This relentless demand to outbuild, outlast, and outshine became the single greatest accelerator of technological innovation in the ancient and medieval world. Consider the simple, terrifying physics of it all. To build taller, you must first move heavier stones from farther away and then place them with impossible precision. This chain of problems forced a cascade of solutions. In Egypt, the drive for perfectly smooth pyramid slopes led to the mastery of copper saws with abrasive sand, the invention of precise leveling techniques using water-filled trenches, and the development of complex ramp systems whose exact configurations we are still debating today. The Romans, needing to span wider spaces and build faster for their expanding empire, perfected the use of the arch and vault, and then created a material that would change construction forever: pozzolana-based concrete. This wasn't just better mortar, it was a man-made stone that could be poured into wooden frames to create the vast, curved ceilings of the baths of Caracalla or the Pantheon's majestic dome. Centuries later in medieval France, the ambition to fill cathedral walls with heavenly light created a structural crisis. The heavy stone roof was pushing the walls outward, threatening collapse. The answer, born from this competitive desire for height and transparency, was the flying buttress, an external skeleton of stone that leaped away from the building, channeling the thrust down to the ground and freeing the walls to become delicate curtains of stained glass. As materials scientist J. E. Gordon noted, the history of materials is largely the history of civilization, and nothing advanced that history faster than the urgent need to surpass a neighbor. This technological scramble was not a polite exchange of ideas at a symposium. It was often a ruthless race to capture and control knowledge. A skilled engineer or a master mosaicist was a strategic asset, as valuable as a regiment of soldiers. Rulers routinely poached artisans from rival territories, offered fortunes to defecting architects, or claimed the finest craftsmen as spoils of war. This forced pooling of talent, however coercive, created unprecedented hubs of cross-cultural innovation. To align a temple with the rising sun of the solstice, you needed advanced astronomy and mathematics. To transport a 200-ton obelisk down the Nile, you needed breakthroughs in logistics, buoyancy, and large-scale coordination. Brunelleschi, facing the Dome of Florence, didn't just design the structure. He invented the machines to build it, including an ox-driven hoist with a revolutionary reversible gear system that could lift massive stones hundreds of feet and then gently lower them into place. Every facet of practical knowledge, from quarrying and metallurgy to pulley systems and crane technology, was pulled forward by this relentless competitive drag. The need to outdo created a permanent, hungry demand for the new. Yet for all the stone and machinery, for all the geometric calculations and logistical marvels, these wonders were never just engineering projects. They were acts of profound psychological warfare, designed to trigger a very specific and powerful reaction in the friend, the citizen, and most importantly, the foe. A towering pyramid is more than a tomb, it is a message. At its core, the architectural arms race is a deep psychological strategy, a form of non-verbal communication between states that speaks directly to our most fundamental instincts. Anthropologists call this costly signaling. the idea that an extravagant, difficult-to-produce display reliably communicates underlying strength. In nature, a peacock's cumbersome tail signals robust health to potential mates. In human history, a monument that consumes decades of labor and a kingdom's wealth sends an equally clear signal: we have resources to spare. This conspicuous construction, a term echoing economist Thorstein Veblen's theory of conspicuous consumption, was the ultimate deterrent and recruitment tool. It told potential aggressors, if we can build this, imagine the army we could raise. Simultaneously, it whispered to neighboring elites and skilled artisans, join us, for we are the rising power, the center of wealth and divine favor. This stone propaganda operated on two audiences, internal and external, with meticulous precision. For the citizens who lived in its shadow, a grand monument narrated a story of collective identity and destiny. The intricate iconography carved into temple walls or woven into mosaics was not mere decoration. It was a state-approved textbook. It showed the king performing sacred rituals, receiving blessings from the gods, or triumphing in battle. Hieroglyphs on an Egyptian obelisk or the sculpted metopes on the Parthenon served as permanent press releases, reinforcing a narrative of divine mandate and unmatched cultural sophistication. This constant visual reinforcement fostered internal cohesion, transforming individual laborers and farmers into proud participants in a grand, historic project. Their shared effort and the awe-inspiring result solidified a sense of belonging to something greater than themselves. For the foreign visitor, the pilgrim, or the ambassador traveling along a major trade route, the message was one of calculated intimidation and allure. Strategic placement was key, a ziggurat visible for miles across the flat Mesopotamian plain, or a cathedral spire dominating the skyline of a medieval city, served as a permanent landmark of power. These structures were often positioned along crucial avenues of travel, ensuring that anyone moving through the region would be unavoidably confronted by their majesty. The Great Pyramid of Giza did not hide in a valley. It stood on the plateau's edge, a stark geometric silhouette against the sky, announcing the pharaoh's god-king status to every caravan approaching from the east. Hagia Sophia, with its revolutionary dome, was not just a church for Constantinople's citizens. It was the first breathtaking sight for ships entering the Golden Horn, a definitive statement that this city was the new Rome, its faith and emperor supreme. This psychological warfare in stone was incredibly effective because it bypassed rational debate and spoke directly to emotion and belief. It created a reality through sheer, overwhelming presence. You could argue with a treaty, but how do you argue with a mountain made by men? The investment was staggering, often diverting wealth and labor from other vital needs. Yet for rulers, the long-term payoff in stability, prestige, and legacy was deemed worth the immense cost. The stones themselves became silent orators, delivering sermons on power that echoed across generations. But this relentless pursuit of prestige, this drive to build the definitive statement in granite and marble, carried with it a hidden and dangerous fragility. For every golden age sparked by rivalry, there was a moment when the scales tipped, when the cost of glory began to hollow out the very state it was meant to glorify. Every golden age casts a long, dark shadow. Behind the gleaming marble and the towering stone, we must ask a difficult question: who built these wonders and at what cost? The romantic image of a single genius architect is dwarfed by the reality of thousands of anonymous hands, a vast human engine mobilized for a single purpose. The labor systems that raised these monuments were as complex as the structures themselves, ranging from state-organized corvée labor, where citizens contributed seasonal work as a form of tax, to the brutal reality of slavery and conscription from conquered peoples. While popular imagination often leans toward the latter, archaeological evidence paints a more nuanced picture. Studies at the Giza Plateau, for example, reveal worker settlements with bakeries capable of producing thousands of loaves daily, evidence of medical care for injuries, and even records of beer rations. This suggests a massive, state-managed workforce of skilled and unskilled laborers, not solely slaves, who were housed and fed as part of a colossal national project. At Teotihuacan in Mexico, the construction of the Pyramid of the Sun appears to have involved a form of communal labor, a shared civic and religious duty that united the city's diverse population. Yet regardless of the system's organization, the scale of human effort remains almost incomprehensible. The logistical challenge of feeding, housing, and coordinating thousands of workers for decades required an administrative bureaucracy of staggering efficiency, one that could redirect the entire economic surplus of a kingdom toward a single point on the map. The material cost was equally profound, etching itself permanently into the environment. To fire the bricks for a single ziggurat required forests of timber. The production of lime mortar for Maya pyramids or Roman concrete consumed vast quantities of fuel wood, leading to regional deforestation. Quarries became landscapes of their own, great wounds in the earth from which million-ton blocks were extracted, transported over impossible distances using rivers, sledges, and sheer human ingenuity. This relentless extraction was more than an engineering feat. It was a fundamental reshaping of the local ecology and a massive diversion of resources. The economic strain could be immense. A state pouring its wealth into a pyramid or a cathedral was not investing in roads, granaries, or irrigation. It risked triggering inflation by flooding a limited economy with wages for workers, and it could dangerously disrupt agricultural cycles by pulling farmers from their fields during crucial planting or harvest seasons. Some scholars theorize that the Maya collapse was exacerbated by this very overextension, as rival city-states engaged in an ever more costly architectural competition, draining labor and resources until the social and environmental systems could no longer bear the weight. The monuments that were meant to guarantee a dynasty's eternal legacy could, in the end, hollow out the state from within. This perspective does not diminish the achievements, it deepens our understanding of their true scale. These wonders were not simply built, they were collectively endured. They represent the culmination of social organization, political will, and the labor of generations whose names are lost to history. Recognizing the immense human effort and societal sacrifice embedded in every stone makes the surviving structures not just testaments to a ruler's ego, but memorials to a civilization's total capacity. They stand as reminders that our greatest leaps forward are often propelled by immense pressure, and that the line between a golden age and an age of exhaustion can be perilously thin. The legacy is therefore a dual one of breathtaking human triumph shadowed by profound cost, a poignant truth written into the very foundations of our most admired ruins. The final stone of a royal pyramid was often laid by a king's command, but the most exquisite chapel within a cathedral might bear the mark of a wool merchant's ambition. For all the power of emperors and pharaohs, some of history's most fascinating architectural competitions were driven by entities with a different kind of influence, networks of faith and finance. When we look beyond the state, we see rivalries between trading guilds, monastic orders, and banking dynasties, all using architecture as their chosen weapon in a silent contest for prestige. This phenomenon is what archaeologists sometimes call peer-polity interaction, where similar, often non-state entities push each other to new heights through direct competition. It reveals that the drive to outbuild is not just a tool of kings, but a fundamental engine of human cultural production. Consider the soaring vaults of a medieval European cathedral. While the bishop may have overseen its construction, its interior was often a mosaic of competing patronage. Wealthy guilds representing bakers, masons, or cloth merchants would fund individual side chapels, each vying to commission the most beautiful stained glass window or the most elaborate sculpted altar. Their names were subtly inscribed in the stonework or glass, a permanent advertisement of their piety and prosperity to the entire city. This was not a top-down decree, but a bottom-up rivalry, where commercial success was translated directly into sacred art, fueling an explosion of decorative innovation within the shared shell of the church. Half a world away, along the bustling Silk Road, a different kind of spiritual competition unfolded. Buddhist monasteries, positioned at vital oasis towns, competed for the devotion of wealthy caravan traders and the prestige that came with them. Their medium was not freestanding temples, but cave complexes carved directly into cliff faces, like those at Dunhuang or Bamiyan. Donors would sponsor the carving and painting of a single cave chamber, and the rivalry to create the most magnificent Buddha statue, the most intricate mural depicting paradise, or the most theologically advanced iconography drove a breathtaking artistic exchange. Styles from India, Persia, and China merged and evolved along these routes, disseminated not by imperial edict, but by the movement of pilgrims, monks, and merchants who carried the memory of the most impressive sites with them. Historian Janet Abu-Lughod described this pre-modern world as a tapestry of interconnected subsystems, where such commercial and religious networks created a shared language of form and ornament, all spurred by competition for patronage. Back in Europe, the Hanseatic League, a powerful alliance of merchant cities, expressed its collective identity and rivalry with southern trading centers through a distinct architectural style, brick Gothic. In cities like Lübeck and Tallinn, where natural stone was scarce, they developed a mastery of molded brick to create towering churches and ornate town halls with intricate stepped gables. The grandeur of a city's brickwork directly proclaimed its economic might within the League's network. Similarly, in India, the great stupas, hemispherical monuments housing relics, became sites of competitive donation. The stupas at Sanchai and Amaravati, though separated by centuries and distance, show an evolution in decorative ambition, with railings and gateways becoming increasingly elaborate as donors sought to leave a more lasting mark than their predecessors. Nowhere was this peer competition more personal than in the city-states of Renaissance Italy. Banking families like the Medici, the Pitti, and the Strozzi turned their city into a chessboard of domestic one-upmanship. Their palazzi were not just homes, they were fortified statements of wealth and taste. The rusticated stone of the Palazzo Medici communicated formidable strength, while the slightly later Palazzo Strozzi, built by a rival banking family, took the same basic form but amplified its scale and classical detail in a clear attempt to surpass it. This was a direct dialogue between economic equals, fought with cornices and courtyards, driving the rapid refinement of Renaissance architecture. The dynamic is clear: whether the currency is spiritual merit, commercial clout, or familial honor, the human impulse to compete through building transcends the institution of the state. It is a thread that connects the guild chapel to the caravan cave and the merchant's palace to the monastic library. As the world moved toward the modern era, this ancient dynamic would not disappear. It would simply find new patrons, new materials, and a terrifying new scale. The 19th century landscape became a museum of borrowed grandeur. Where once a king might have commissioned an original pyramid, now a parliament would reach for a neo-Gothic spire. This was the ancient architectural arms race reborn in an age of iron and empire, but with a crucial new weapon: the power of historical memory. Emerging nation-states, from a unified Germany to a post-revolutionary France, looked to the past not for mere decoration, but for a ready-made language of legitimacy. They scoured history for a style that could tell their specific story, forging a direct visual link between the modern state and a glorified golden age. A neoclassical Capitol building whispered of democratic Athens and republican Rome, claiming the mantle of enlightened reason and civic virtue. A neo-Gothic parliament, like the Palace of Westminster rising beside the Thames, evoked the organic growth of Christian Europe and the ancient liberties of the medieval world. Even the rounded arches of the Romanesque revival in Germany were a deliberate choice, a way to assert a distinct Northern European identity separate from the classical tastes of France or the Gothic of Britain. Architectural historian Kenneth Frampton would later describe this impulse as a search for a critical regionalism, an architecture that resisted homogenization by rooting itself in local context and tradition. In the 19th century, that context was often an invented one, a carefully curated past designed for present-day competition. This rivalry played out most vividly in the race to build the definitive national museum. The British Museum and the Louvre in Paris were not just repositories of art, they were temples to national prestige, built to house the spoils of empire and archaeology. Their very architecture made an argument. The Louvre's grand classical facade spoke of France's claim to be the new Rome, the center of universal civilization. The British Museum's imposing Greek Revival portico, inspired by the Parthenon, declared Britain as the rightful heir to Athenian democracy and the guardian of the classical tradition. Each new wing, each grand hall, was a move in a high-stakes game of cultural one-upmanship. The competition reached its most spectacular form in the great international exhibitions. The Crystal Palace, a vast greenhouse of iron and glass built for London's Great Exhibition of 1851, was itself the ultimate exhibit. It was not a revival of any past style, but a breathtaking proclamation of British industrial supremacy and technological optimism. France answered with ever more elaborate expositions universelles in Paris, constructing the Eiffel Tower for the 1889 fair as a soaring, defiantly modern retort to London's Crystal Temple. These events were the ancient practice of erecting a dazzling monument for all to see, translated into the industrial age, with nations competing for global attention and investment. The machinery of this rivalry was now powered by steam and steel, but the psychological goals remained unchanged. A grand railway station, like St. Pancras in London with its neo-Gothic hotel facade, was more than a transit hub. It was the proud gateway to a city and an empire designed to overwhelm the arriving traveler. An opera house like the Palais Garnier in Paris was a deliberate spectacle of opulence meant to outshine any court theater of old, proving that Republican France could cultivate the arts as magnificently as any monarchy. This was costly signaling on a national scale, using architecture to project economic power, cultural sophistication, and political stability to the world. The ancient urge to outbuild had simply found new patrons, the modern nation-state and the industrial capitalist, and new materials like cast iron and plate glass to express an age-old ambition. So in our own contemporary, globalized world, has this competitive spirit finally faded, or has it simply mutated once more, finding expression not in stone facades that reference the past, but in shimmering glass towers that compete to define the future? The skyline of the 21st century is a graph of economic ambition. Our modern ziggurats are no longer temples to gods or kings, but towers of glass and steel that compete for the title of tallest, greenest, or most iconic. In Dubai, the Burj Khalifa pierces the clouds, a needle of superlative height. In Shanghai, the twisting form of the Shanghai Tower spirals upward, a marvel of aerodynamic engineering. In New York, One World Trade Center stands as a statement of resilience and renewal. These structures are the weapons of a new kind of rivalry, one fought between global cities and the multinational corporations that inhabit them. Their message is one of financial supremacy, technological prowess, and the power to attract the world's capital and talent. As sociologist Saskia Sassen observed, these global cities become key sites for the advanced services and finance that run the world economy, and their skylines are the most visible advertisement of that status. To build a landmark is to declare your place on that exclusive map. This contemporary contest has created a new kind of celebrity, the starchitect. Names like Zaha Hadid, Frank Gehry, and Renzo Piano are now global brands, their distinctive, often sculptural designs sought after by city councils and corporate boards. A museum that looks like a ship's sails in Bilbao or an opera house that resembles seashells in Sydney is not just a building, it is a destination. Cities commission these architectural spectacles in a direct bid for what is known as the Bilbao effect, the transformative power of a single iconic building to boost tourism, revitalize a district, and project an image of cultural sophistication. The competition is no longer just about height, it is about having a signature, a unique silhouette that is instantly recognizable in a crowded, connected world. The metrics of success have also evolved. Alongside sheer scale and artistic daring, sustainability has become a crucial new battlefield. The drive to outbuild now includes the imperative to outgreen. Skyscrapers compete for prestigious certifications like LEED Platinum, boasting double-skin facades that regulate temperature, wind turbines integrated into their spires, and intelligent systems that recycle rainwater and waste energy. The race to create the most efficient, environmentally sensitive tower pushes material science to its limits, leading to innovations in high-strength concrete, photovoltaic glass, and smart building management software. This green arms race reflects a modern form of prestige, where ecological responsibility is a powerful component of a city's or corporation's global image. This corporate dimension is perhaps most visible in the rivalries between technology giants. The sprawling, spaceship-like ring of Apple Park in Cupertino stands in quiet competition with the playful, colorful chaos of the Googleplex in Mountain View. These campuses are not just offices, they are three-dimensional mission statements and the ultimate tools for talent recruitment. They are designed to create an immersive environment that embodies the company's culture, whether it is Apple's minimalist perfection or Google's collaborative innovation. They offer every amenity from gourmet cafeterias to climbing walls in a bid to keep the world's best engineers and designers within their walls. The architecture itself becomes a perk and a promise, signaling that this is the place where the future is being built. So while the patrons have shifted from pharaohs to mayors and chief executive officers, the fundamental human impulse remains eerily familiar. We still use architecture to assert dominance, to attract vital resources, and to etch our identity onto the horizon. The materials are different, the scale is staggering, and the goals are framed in terms of gross domestic product and carbon neutrality. But the silent conversation between rivals is written in the same enduring language of ambition. Looking back across 5,000 years of this behavior, from the first stepped pyramid to the latest twisting tower, what profound truth about ourselves does this pattern reveal? The stones themselves hold the final lesson. Our journey across millennia reveals a powerful and persistent truth about human nature. When ambition is channeled into rivalry, it becomes a phenomenal engine for progress, capable of lifting entire civilizations to heights they would never have reached in isolation. The need to outbuild a neighbor forced breakthroughs in mathematics, engineering, and logistics, creating the very foundations of our technical world. This drive gave us the arch, the dome, the flying buttress, and the skyscraper. It is a testament to our ability to turn the simple urge to compete into something of breathtaking and lasting beauty. Yet this same history teaches us a second, equally vital lesson. Architecture is never neutral stone. It is always a narrative, a physical argument about who holds power, what a society values, and where it believes it stands in the cosmos. From the hieroglyphs on an obelisk to the corporate logo on a glass tower, every structure tells a story it wants us to believe, and the third lesson is perhaps the most sobering. This competitive energy, for all its brilliance, casts a long shadow. The same drive that produced the Parthenon also consumed the labor of generations and diverted resources from other human needs. The line between a golden age and an age of exhaustion is perilously thin, defined by the balance between aspiration and overreach. This legacy invites us to look inward. In our own lives and societies, what forms do our modern architectural arms races take? We no longer build pyramids, but we engage in relentless competitions of our own. We race for the tallest building, the fastest processor, the most viral social media post, the most cited academic paper. These are the new arenas where we seek to outshine our rivals and etch our names into the digital or intellectual landscape. The fundamental psychology remains unchanged. The critical question then becomes, how can we harness this undeniable competitive energy for collective benefit while consciously avoiding the exploitation and excess of the past? How do we build our towers without hollowing out our foundations? Winston Churchill once observed, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." His words are a profound reminder that the structures we choose to create, whether physical, social, or technological, will inevitably mold the society that lives within them. They dictate how we interact, what we prioritize, and who feels included or excluded. Understanding this deep history transforms us from passive observers into critical participants in our own world. It allows us to look at a city skyline and see not just glass and steel, but a graph of economic rivalry. It lets us walk through an ancient ruin and hear the echoes of a king's desperate bid for legitimacy. We become literate in the silent language of power and aspiration that surrounds us every day. For the enthusiast, this knowledge is the ultimate key. It turns every trip, every glance at a building into a detective story. You begin to ask new questions. Why this style here? Who was trying to impress whom? What resource had to be mastered to make this possible? The legacy of these ancient rivalries is not locked in the past. It is the very framework of our present, inviting us to decode its messages and, ultimately, to consider what stories we wish our own monuments to tell. A ruin is a story waiting to be decoded. To truly understand an ancient site, you must learn to read it not as a peaceful monument, but as a competitor's entry in a long-forgotten contest. This transforms a simple visit into active historical detective work, where every stone becomes a clue to the ambitions and anxieties of its builders. The first question to ask is perhaps the most direct: who was the rival? The answer is not always a neighboring kingdom. Sometimes the competition was internal, a new pharaoh striving to outshine his father's pyramid, creating the stepped progression you see on the Giza plateau. Other times, the rival was ideological, like a Christian basilica built deliberately atop a pagan temple to signal a new world order. Identifying the opponent immediately frames every architectural choice that follows. Next, listen for the boasts. Inscriptions are the literal voice of the past, and they were often carved for competitive display. Look for texts that enumerate victories, divine endorsements, or lists of exotic tribute. The hieroglyphs on an Egyptian obelisk did not just name the king, they detailed his military campaigns and the foreign lands he subdued. The Rosetta Stone itself, though an administrative decree, was created in 3 scripts to ensure its message of Ptolemaic authority was understood by Egyptian priests, Greek administrators, and anyone else who might challenge it. These were not private diaries, they were public relations carved in granite. Then, assess the scale and material with a competitor's eye. The sheer size of a structure is an obvious flex, but the true tell is often in the stone itself. Ask where it came from. The use of rare, imported materials is a powerful signal of economic reach. The Romans transporting Egyptian granite columns across the Mediterranean, or the Maya using distant jade for royal masks, were not making arbitrary aesthetic choices. They were demonstrating control over vast trade networks and the wealth to command them. The very presence of an exotic stone is a silent map of influence and a challenge to rivals who lacked such connections. Engineering innovation is another clear competitive signature. Look for features that represent a technical leap, something built for the first time or on an unprecedented scale. The first true arch, the first dome resting on pendentives like Hagia Sophia, or the first flying buttress on a Gothic cathedral, these were not just solutions to structural problems. They were declarations of intellectual capital, proof that a state or patron had attracted the brightest minds and could solve puzzles their rivals could not. The sophistication itself was the message. Finally, consider the location strategically. Was the site placed for maximum visibility, like a lighthouse on a promontory or a ziggurat on a flat plain? Was it built on a contested frontier, like a Roman fort along Hadrian's Wall, where its very presence was an act of territorial defiance? The geography of a building often reveals its intended audience. A palace hidden in a secluded valley speaks to a different kind of power than a temple crowning the Acropolis, visible to an entire city and its visitors. The choice of site answers the question, who was meant to see this and what were they meant to feel? By applying this simple framework, you begin to see with new eyes. The pyramids of Giza are not just tombs, they are a family's escalating bid for immortality, each slightly different in angle and internal layout as architects experimented to build higher and more perfectly. The defensive towers added to a Roman fort in a restless province tell a story of an ongoing, simmering rivalry with local tribes. Even the decorative motifs on a Mycenaean palace gate, adopted from Minoan art but reinterpreted with martial themes, reveal a culture competing for sophistication while asserting its own brutal strength. This practice turns sightseeing into a dialogue with the past. You are no longer just observing history, you are interpreting the very language of ambition. To see this code in action across centuries, we can turn to one final, legendary site where every layer of stone is a chapter in a millennia-long contest for a city's soul. The Acropolis of Athens is a mountain of memory, each layer a different civilization's claim to supremacy. Its story begins not with white marble temples, but with massive, rough-hewn walls. Long before Pericles, this rocky outcrop was a Mycenaean citadel, part of that earlier network of fortified rivals we explored. Its cyclopean walls, built from stones so large they seemed the work of giants, shouted a message of defense and warrior king authority, a direct challenge to other Bronze Age power centers like Mycenae and Turin. This was the Acropolis in its first competitive guise, a fortress competing for survival in a dangerous world. Then, for centuries, it stood as a quiet, sacred space for archaic temples, until a single, defining moment of rivalry ignited its transformation. Following the Persian Wars, in which a coalition of Greek city-states, led by Athens and Sparta, repelled a massive invasion, Athens emerged not just victorious but ambitious. The statesman Pericles saw an opportunity. Using funds from the Delian League treasury, an alliance meant for mutual defense against Persia, he launched a breathtaking building program. This was more than civic beautification, it was a calculated act of one-upmanship. The message was aimed at two rivals at Sparta, Athens' fellow Greek victor now becoming its political enemy, and at the defeated Persian Empire itself. The new Acropolis would be a permanent monument to Athenian cultural and political supremacy, paid for by the very allies it sought to dominate. Archaeologist Joan Breton Connolly describes the Acropolis as the ultimate billboard for Athenian identity, a spectacle of power meant to be seen from anywhere in the city and by every visiting diplomat. The Parthenon, its crowning glory, was a masterpiece of this propaganda. Its sculptural program was a continuous metaphor for Athenian rivalries. The metopes, those square panels high on the temple's exterior, depicted legendary battles, Greeks fighting Amazons and Lapiths battling centaurs. To the Athenian citizen, these were not just myths, They were allegories for their own struggles, the civilized Greek order overcoming the chaotic barbarian, a clear reference to their victory over the Persians. The magnificent frieze inside the colonnade showed the Panathenaic procession, a celebration of Athenian civic unity and religious devotion, subtly reinforcing the idea that Athens was not just powerful, but uniquely pious and harmonious. Every optical refinement, every calculated proportion, was designed to create a sense of perfect, awe-inspiring order, a visual rebuttal to the perceived brutality of Persia and the austere militarism of Sparta. But the theater of power always welcomes new actors. Centuries later, after the rise of Christianity, the Parthenon underwent a profound conversion. It was transformed into a church dedicated to the Virgin Mary. This was architectural competition of a spiritual kind, the new state religion physically appropriating the most potent symbol of the old pagan world. The great statue of Athena was removed, an apse was carved into the east end, and Christian frescoes covered the walls. The building's very purpose was rewritten, from a temple celebrating a civic goddess to a church honoring a divine mother, a direct challenge to the fading beliefs of the past. The rivalry took another turn with the Ottoman conquest. In the 15th century, the Christian church became a mosque with a minaret added to its southwest corner. Once again, the structure was recalibrated for a new ideology, its silhouette and interior reoriented toward a different form of worship. The Acropolis was now a prize in the long contest between Christianity and Islam, its stones testifying to the triumph of a new empire. Finally, in the 19th century, the site took on its modern symbolic role. As Greece fought for and won its independence from the Ottoman Empire, the ruined Acropolis became the ultimate symbol for the fledgling nation-state. It was no longer a functioning mosque or church, but a romantic ruin, an emblem of a pure, classical past that the new Greece sought to reclaim. This was a rivalry with history itself, an attempt to connect the modern state to an idealized ancient lineage, consciously bypassing the Byzantine and Ottoman centuries in between. Restoration efforts beginning in this period were as much about constructing a national identity as they were about archaeology. Each of these layers, from Mycenaean fortress to classical temple, from church to mosque to national monument, represents a distinct act of competitive overwriting. As archaeologist Manolis Koras notes, the Acropolis is a living document of ideological succession, where each era sought to inscribe its own narrative onto the sacred rock, either by building anew or by repurposing what was already there. It is the ultimate case study, a single site where millennia of rivalry are compressed into one breathtaking view. This microcosm proves that the architectural arms race is not just about building bigger than your neighbor, it is about claiming the past to control the present. Some stones carry secrets even modern engineering cannot crack. The silent, colossal heads of Easter Island, the Moai, stand with their backs to the sea, gazing inland over territories that were once fiercely contested. Archaeological evidence suggests their creation and transport was driven by intense rivalry between island clans, a competition to honor ancestors and assert dominance through ever larger, more impressive statues. The enduring mystery of how they were moved, possibly walked upright in a rocking motion using ropes, speaks to a society so motivated by competition that it dedicated immense resources to solving a logistical puzzle of staggering difficulty. This was not idle artistry, it was a costly signal carved in volcanic tuff, a testament to what humans will invent when the need to outdo a neighbor becomes an existential imperative. Across the globe, the terrace walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru present another enigma. These zigzagging ramparts are built from limestone blocks so massive, some weighing over 100 tons, and fitted together with such precision that a razor blade cannot slip between them. The construction method remains debated, a lost knowledge from a time when the Inca Empire, perhaps in rivalry with earlier cultures or among its own master builders, pushed stoneworking to a level that defies easy explanation. Each perfectly shaped and placed stone was a statement of control over both material and manpower, a silent scream of superiority frozen in rock. Perhaps the most staggering puzzle lies in the ruins of Baalbek in Lebanon. The Roman temple complex there rests upon a platform featuring the trilithon, 3 stones each estimated to weigh around 800 tons. Nearby, in a quarry, lies the even larger stone of the pregnant woman, a single block weighing well over 1,000 tons. The question is not just why, but how. What combination of levers, ramps, ropes, and coordinated labor could possibly move such monoliths even a few hundred meters? This feat likely occurred during the Roman era, a period of intense imperial competition where provinces vied to build the most magnificent monuments to please the emperor and outshine other cities. The solution they found was so advanced, so specific to that context of rivalry and resource, that its details have vanished from history. These unsolved enigmas force us to confront a humbling possibility. For every moai that still stands, for every wall at Sacsayhuamon we can study, how many rival achievements have been utterly lost? Our historical record is overwhelmingly shaped by the victors of these contests, those whose monuments survived war, repurposing, or the slow erosion of time. What of the losers, a rival city's grand temple deliberately razed and its stones carted away to build the winner's palace? A dynasty's glorious capital, abandoned to the jungle until its very name was forgotten. An engineering marvel that collapsed from its own audacity, leaving only fragments that puzzle us today. The silence in the archaeological record is not empty, it is loud with absence. What forgotten rivalries spurred innovations that died with their creators? What cultural golden ages flickered brightly in a now silent valley? Their only legacy a strange pottery shard or an unexplained earthwork. This incomplete picture is the final, haunting lesson of the architectural arms race. The drive to compete built the wonders we admire, but it also ensured that many wonders and the stories of those who built them would be erased by the very same competitive impulse. The stones that remain are not just trophies of the winners, they are also tombstones for the lost ingenuity of the rivals they defeated. This lingering mystery invites us to look at every ancient site with a sense of profound curiosity, to wonder not only at what we see, but to listen for the echoes of what is no longer there. That drive to compete, to build a legacy that outlasts memory, is written across the entire human story. From the deserts of Egypt to the jungles of Guatemala, we have traced how that simple, powerful urge to outshine a rival has repeatedly sculpted our world's most iconic landscapes. The pyramids, the cathedrals, the soaring towers, they were not born from peaceful, isolated genius. They were forged in the fire of fierce, focused competition, a pressure that pushed societies to the very limits of their imagination, their resources, and their technical skill. These architectural golden ages teach us a profound truth about ourselves. Our greatest collective achievements are often born from struggle, from ambition, and from that relentless human desire to leave a mark upon the earth that shouts our story across the centuries. It is a paradox that our most beautiful and enduring creations so frequently spring from the need to prove we are better than someone else. Today, as we look upon our own modern skylines of glittering glass and steel, we are not seeing something new. We are witnessing the latest chapter in this ancient, ongoing story. The players have changed, the materials have evolved, but the fundamental conversation remains. It is a dialogue of ambition written in the language of form and height. So let this history change your gaze. Let it inspire you to look deeper at the buildings and structures around you, whether ancient or brand new. See them not just as shelters or offices, but as chapters in a vast, silent story of rivalry and aspiration. Look for the boast in the material, the challenge in the innovation, the silent statement in the silhouette against the sky. Every city skyline is a living graph of this enduring human energy. If you have enjoyed this journey through the competitive spirit that literally built civilization, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the mysteries and patterns of our past. And we would love to hear from you in the comments below. Which ancient rivalry and its breathtaking architectural legacy fascinates you the most? Is it the personal duel between the pharaohs at Giza, the spiritual contest between Byzantine and Gothic domes, or the city-state rivalries of the Maya? Share your thoughts and continue the conversation. Thank you for watching.